Welcome to Beyond Tech, where innovation meets insight. I'm your host, Jackie Slatt, and today I'm joined by guest co-host, Business Development Manager at eTech Group, Ryan Harlan. Along with Ryan, our guest today is Jay Mankata, eTech Group's Director of Solutions. Today we're talking about modernization, but not from the angle you might expect, because the biggest constraint for most manufacturers right now isn't budget, it's uptime. Production can't stop. Lines have to keep running and orders need to be filled. And at the same time, teams are being asked to modernize systems, improve performance, and reduce risk. So the question becomes, how do you modernize without disrupting production? And that's where phase modernization comes in. Instead of a large all at once projects that introduce risk and require extended downtime, leading manufacturers are taking a more incremental approach, making targeted upgrades over time that align with real operational constraints they are working in. Today, we're unpacking what that approach looks like and how to do it effectively. So Ryan, Jay, thanks for being with us today.
Thank
And
you,
I
Jack.
would
Thanks
let
for
you,
having me.
Ryan, kick it off.
Yeah, absolutely. I think talking about phase modernization is something that we've had to work with for many years in the food and beverage industry and something that we're all very familiar with on the control side. So, Jay, I know that you've worked in this industry a long time. Maybe give a little background, and then we'll get you started.
Yeah. So I guess been in the industry 11 years now. Started as a field service engineer, controls engineer way back when, and then worked my way in, programmed, and then into project management, program management, and now I'm our director of solutions.
Beautiful. So, I know in our everyday when I'm working with you and when we're out in the field, we're seeing this from customers, and we're seeing a lot of where we have many areas that a plant is trying to prioritize and trying to modernize. So when you're working with a manufacturer and you're trying to look at this phased approach, what are you hearing from them and how are they approaching this?
Yeah. So lots of stuff. It always depends on who is the manufacturer, obviously. But when we start talking about phase approaches, it usually is 6-month planning, starts talking 6 months back. When budgeting starts, we start looking at schedules, resources, what we're going to modernize, obviously, and how it can impact what the risks are to their facilities and what the best approach is, whether, what the space looks like within that facility to do something temporary for phase cutovers. Or I mean, it's such a long list of what we can look at and what we can do, especially now. As big as eTech is, we have so many resources, so many different disciplines and subject matter experts that we can pull knowledge from. Sometimes it can get really complicated, or it can be a very simple conversation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's what I've seen with my customers too. And I was just thinking, as we're looking at how they decide where to modernize, what are you seeing as the driving risk factor? So say you're a 50-year-old bakery that's trying to upgrade your systems and you know that you've got legacy equipment everywhere, you've got risk, you can't go down, you're still producing, you're still trying to supply your customers, but you know that this has to happen. How do you see that getting structured when you work with your customers?
Yeah. So I think the biggest challenge comes with the communication protocols in a legacy factory like a bakery. They use a lot of serial communication, where a lot of our new products that are coming out, a lot of the new products in the industry, whether it be Rockwell, Siemens, or others, is all Ethernet. And so when we look at that phased approach, we always try to tackle the IT/OT network as much as we can, to minimize the infrastructure hits, and then roll into the devices themselves, and it makes it a little easier when you have to talk from asset to asset.
Okay, so yeah, kind of expand on that. So we're talking about these new systems and we're going to Ethernet, and what's the primary driver for wanting to get everything on Ethernet? Is that just getting the data? Is it just because the new stuff has Ethernet? We know it's not that, right? It's going to be better as you're upgrading. What are they doing once we're modernizing with that?
Yeah, a lot of it is the data, for sure. A lot of customers want to know where their data is coming from, and they're using with, Industry 4.0 and data analytics with AI becoming a huge facilitator in teams being able to read the data and understand the data. It's becoming more important the way I'm seeing it. They want to be able to get that data and get reports and analyze that data. So obviously to get that all up, we start with the network and making sure that's robust so that the data can come through in the right responses.
Yeah, I mean, to take advantage of AI, you can't really do that if you're not connected, right? Like you have
Yeah.
to have some
No,
modernization.
nothing works. You'll have a
Yeah.
language model or an agent that doesn't have anything to pull from, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
It'd be just like asking me. They could call me and ask what's going on in the factory, and I would tell them as much as an AI agent without data. So
Yeah, the data is, from what I understand, having several of these conversations, if you don't have the infrastructure or data that you're collecting, you really cannot approach AI.
Yeah. And looking even forward, Rockwell's a good example. They're moving a lot to the cloud-based solutions. Siemens and everybody else is also doing a lot of cloud-based solutions and digital twinning and data lakes within their facilities that, you know, we couldn't allow that to happen without the IT/OT convergence, as we call it, right? So I'm starting there and then moving to the physical hardware is usually the way to go.
yeah, and when we're talking physical hardware, we're talking about risk mitigation mostly, right? We're talking about getting off these legacy equipment. I mean, especially if you're thinking in a process that isn't very fast, right? You don't need these microsecond, millisecond response times in the system that you get with upgrading equipment. What a lot of manufacturers are looking at is trying to mitigate the risk of the legacy equipment. So when we're looking at that, how do we prioritize risk and what do we what are we doing there when we're structuring these working with the customer, we're talking 6 months in advance and we're trying to help them plan this out. What sort of risks can we prevent through some of these modernizations?
Yeah, downtime, right? Time risks get mitigated 100% through those legacy upgrades. So through those phased approaches, sometimes we put together, install base evaluations where we go through the factory or the plant and establish what are all the hardware they have, and then put together some sort of log that gives us the life cycle status of that equipment, and then we go from oldest to newest.
And then, so say we've gotten this, we know we're going to upgrade this legacy equipment. We're going to upgrade the network. We've got these plans. We've mapped it out 6 months. How do these become successful implementations as opposed to, yeah, we upgraded this one-off panel, we upgraded this one-off system, and then nothing else really moved forward, right? It was more of a pilot than a first use case that got replicated, right? So what does success look like, and how do we look at that? Are we using OEE? Are we using the data that we're getting to try and determine what a successful implementation looks like?
I think success is measured differently for the objective, obviously. But if they are looking to get data, I would say success is 100% measured in being able to report that data in a constructed manner, whether it be in a report or a dashboard, and then being able to tell the story through the days of post commissioning. We'll say when we start looking at the data, seeing it uh, uh, become of some substance, and then being able to talk through it. For example, a plant that we help modernize is able to look at, not just their equipment moving faster, but then they're also looking at their data and how they went from, producing X amount of tons of dirt to now they're producing X amount more of tons of dirt, right? So we're, like you said, we're able to see that data and we're able to see those scales grow. In other use cases, sometimes it's just about operability of the system. Sometimes, when the plants buy these machines, they have all this OEM type programming, just out of the box type of stuff. But after they use it for 20 years, they're able to understand it. They're able to know exactly what they want. And so sometimes through these modernizations, we tweak them and operators get exactly the functions that they need, exactly the displays that they want. And so when we're able to do that, then it makes their jobs easier on the plant floor as well. So depending what, we're trying to target in this migration, whether it be operability, data, or throughput, it varies in success.
Was it more common years ago that food and beverage CPG customer would, when they needed to upgrade, they would just shut the plant down? Or has there so it's breaking these projects into a more phased approach where there is not as much downtime? Is that becoming more critical, or was it always just we can't shut down?
Through in my experience, I feel like downtime has always been an issue
It's
for a
always
plant.
been the
It's
main
always been
priority.
the reoccurring story of, hey, we don't have a lot of downtime, or we need to do it on a weekend.
Okay.
We only have 2 3 days. How do we make this happen? Even in a one day, we have a major cheese manufacturer that we work for. They get 14 hours. once a month, and sometimes every other month, or
Wow.
once every quarter, right? So they
Well,
want to
change is
do the
important.
most what they can out of that time because they just need to keep operating and keep pumping money, and it doesn't make sense for them to go down.
Yeah, I think what you see in CPG versus something like a refinery. I spent years working in refineries, and they would
Hmm.
have full shutdowns where it's 30 to 45 days to take a
Mm.
piece of
Wow.
equipment down and take it out of operation. And they would do everything, but they did that once every 5 years. But you
Okay.
could
Mm.
do everything. And that was a full, you could modernize everything you could get to in that amount of time. And then it would have to be back up and running again. So, for example, a reactor or a furnace might go down for that long. And in food, we're not dealing with that kind of equipment in general. It's also
Yes.
not a process like that generally. It's a lot more discrete manufacturing. There might be some process elements, but it's not the same as something going through that cycle. So you get these small windows more frequently, but you never have the ability to do something really
Like a
robust
big
unless you're pulling
upgrade.
an entire line out, right?
Okay.
And and most places aren't doing that. They're just upgrading bits and pieces of the machines. Maybe they're going to add a robot palletizer, or they're going to add something else that needs to tie in. They're changing how they're using their sensors to scan something, and it needs to then upgrade the rest of the process. A lot of the modernization I'm seeing when we get back to talking about networks is we've got these new devices coming in that need the data and need to be able to communicate, and they aren't designed to communicate with anything but Ethernet. So, for example, a new AI camera that's being used to scan is going in on a system that has a PLC 5 that's still operating. It's just not designed that way, and it's more complicated to make them work together than it should be if it were just plugging into a switch, which is what the modern solution looks like.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's specifically food and bev, to answer the question, or CPG, Jackie, because definitely other industries, like you said, oil and gas, they do some structured shutdowns. And my experience, aggregate has, or cement manufacturers have some of the same thing where they shut everything down 30, 45 days, once or twice a year, or every other year, depending on what the demand is.
Hmm.
Or entertainments, Disney, Universal,
Oh, that's
they
true.
also
Yeah.
do big shutdown ride overhauls and stuff like that. So it'll shut down. This unique minimal downtime thing usually has to do with food and bev, or I think life sciences has some of that too.
Yes. Interesting. Okay. Yeah, that's helpful. I just wanted to understand if this was like a newer concept or if it's something that people are, that been figuring out how to kind of do these upgrades and updates on manufacturing lines while they're still running. If this is something within the last 20, 30 years that, before it wasn't as important, but it sounds like it's kind of always been. I know in steel too, from what I understand from talking with our metals team that, these machines have run for 50 plus years and there's no stopping it.
Yes.
So I assume they're in the same kind of boat. So anyway, yes, thank you.
Yeah, and I think it's becoming more important now with the speed the technology is moving to make these smaller upgrades more frequently. I, Before you might have it as the family upgraded on a controller or as something came through. So you get your PLC 2 and your PLC 5 and your SLCs and if you're using Rockwell, I'm using Rockwell terms because I used to work there, not because of any particular favoritism, but just as a habit to control logic. So you know where we are now, and I think as we're moving into this digital world where, Rockwell's not even talking, and PLC manufacturers are talking about digital PLCs coming through and cloud-based computing
Wow.
on the line. And we've gone so far from just physical hardware that's going to live there 20 years to this constant need for almost an IT style upgrade cycle for a lot of
Hmm.
these devices where you're looking in smaller and smaller windows to get everything that you want to be able to get out of the machines. So especially with machine learning, I mean, machine learning's been around before AI. You could have systems at a juice concentrate manufacturer I worked with once that was looking at using machine learning to measure their bricks of concentrate coming out of the system to mimic an operator using sensors and things like that. And that's happening at a scale that 10 years ago we wouldn't have thought was believable. Where we're trying to put that in and removing operators from decision making needs a lot of it. We're not even close in most of these facilities to doing that yet.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot of people are relating it to the age of the internet. As soon as the internet came out, things started booming. Then everything started going through the internet. We started purchasing everything through the internet, right? All this started going down in a very fast fashion. It seems like manufacturing is starting to feel like the same way. It's every day is changing. You gotta stay up to date with all the technology. Hardware is becoming end of life much faster. Softwares are getting revised. It seems like,
every day.
every 6 months. Wouldn't go to extreme say every day, but I mean, I'm sure our software engineers feel like it's an everyday thing for sure. As soon as
Mhm.
we're done upgrading to one or patching or revising some firmware, it's like almost the next thing's coming out. Things moving just so fast in the world today, for sure.
I don't know if there's a real answer here, but I'm just curious. Are there manufacturers who are kind of like, I'm just going to wait and see which one of these like softwares is really like going to work the best by letting other people kind of trial and error and see what they run into? And if that is the case, what is the risk in kind of waiting too long to kind of get on the train at all? Like, I know I've heard in things that, like, if you're not thinking about AI yet, you're too late. Like you need to kind of jump in. I guess I'm seeing if there's a correlation in like software world.
I I think for better or worse, that conversation is so front of mind for the C-suite at every one of these companies that people don't have a choice.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
I would say nobody wants to be left behind. And when you're talking in the world that I'm usually living in CPG, that these are frequently 100-year-old companies or companies that have, they feel like America, right? When you're talking
Mhm.
about some of these food manufacturers that have been around forever and are such a part of our lives that they don't want to be left behind and be, a dying brand that went away and you don't hear about anymore. So they're moving through everything, and we're seeing it not just in the manufacturing part, but in the logistics and the tracking, the distribution. It's tying the entire smart factory together. Is finally it feels like it's real. It's been something we've talked about
Mhm.
for a decade in Industry 4.0 and digital transformation, and it feels like we're finally there where the lift isn't as big as it was a few years ago to have everything talk to each other and get all that data and then use some of your spare compute now to tie it all together in a way that's a lot simpler than and a lot of companies that are offering these solutions now as well for the
Yeah.
manufacturing.
It's going to sound cliche, but also that's what companies have, companies like ours, right? That's why we're growing so massively, because instead of looking inward and asking their engineers, hey, should we do X, and getting some sort of biased opinion, they come to us and say, "Hey, what have you guys been doing with everybody else, and how can that apply to us?" And then because we have that experience, we're able to go deliver through our experience what we think can be the best solution at times. But we do have customers where they'll say, "Hey, we're going to deadlock at this revision, and then wait a few revisions before we go to the next one." And in some cases, that does hurt them, because then those migrations, we don't know what the impact can be to the next version, instead of going version to version every time a new one releases. Yes, there's other risks like, oh, well, we don't know what that impact's going to be because we don't know what the issues are with this next revision. And we may take on that risk. But if you wait too long, you're also taking on a separate risk of it costing more money to go to that next migration, because depending on, the software, we'll talk Rockwell, they have AOIs. Maybe the AOI worked in version, I'll throw a version out, version 33, but then you're trying to go all the way to version 37 today, and that AOI doesn't work, but you didn't figure that out incrementally. You waited 4 or 5 revisions to go that far out to go figure that out. Now you may have many more PLCs that you need to go do versus, some of these other ones that you were doing through these migrations, right?
Mhm.
So it's like a tricky scenario, the chicken before the egg type of thing. Who's going to do it first? Who's going to let it hatch and see how it kind of works out?
Yeah, to your point though, having a partner like agnostic technology partner, a system integrator to kind of help guide through those takes a little bit of, I would think, some of the stress off the manufacturer because we have the insight from not just their facility, but everyone else that we've worked with too.
Yeah, and I think something else I've been seeing along those lines is that people are a lot less afraid to be an early adopter today than they were when it came to switching versions and things like that, because there's usually something new that they're trying to do that they feel like they're roadblocked on, as opposed to in the past that it was a lot more fear about upgrading and migration, that things would break, and now it's a lot more fear that they won't be able to do what they feel like they have to do in the future if they're
Yeah.
not up to date on everything. So it feels like the risk is being left behind as opposed to the risk being to the current manufacturing process as much as it was in the past.
No, that's a good point too.
Yeah, and
So sorry, I kind of derailed us on that side
that's
quest.
no, that's let's go on some side quests. We'll do it.
Yeah.
It'll be fine. We'll have a villager
I'm a
with a
journeyman, no
exclamation point.
problem. Let's
Yeah.
go.
No, absolutely. I think one of the cool things about all the data and information that people are getting from these migrations, to try and circle us back, is it's gotten a lot easier to find and derive an ROI for some of these projects for executives and leaders as well. Because in the past, if you went from one version of a PLC to another version of the PLC, and you didn't really have the data, and you still weren't, a lot of companies still weren't even capturing OEE when it was going through the line. They would get number of cases produced or a general uptime. They would know their maintenance downtime loosely on an Excel spreadsheet. But now, as we're calculating through and we're getting all that information, it's a lot easier to justify a modernization, especially when we're doing it in a phased approach, that we can compare lines and see progress and see milestones to find what that payback time is and what they're actually getting for it. Because I mean, I don't know what the exact rule of thumb is, but once it gets over 18 months, I know it's never a go. When it's a year, sometimes it's a go. And when it's 6 months, we should have done it yesterday. Right. So somewhere in those lines. And I think, Jay, I know we've been starting to do that with our projects, calculating out an ROI and doing that. And I do feel like it gets easier as you do a phased approach to find those numbers.
Absolutely.
So that's been helpful. I think that's accelerated a lot of this for a lot of manufacturers, especially when you're talking a full factory that needs to be modernized on some level. And maybe it's one generation behind, some parts are 2 generations behind, and we're trying to get everything up to speed. It's a lot easier now with the data we have and with the analytics we have to, after the first project, see that where it's paying back.
Do you also have a way for, or maybe this is something clients are doing not themselves, but by having the upgrade, the modernization project going on, to reduce their risk and or the burden of maintenance issues, unexpected maintenance issues coming up? Is that something that can be calculated in when trying to define the cost or the ROI of an upgrade?
Yeah. So typically in a line, you'd have your OEE measurement, and the uptime component as part of it, your unplanned downtime versus your planned downtime. And what happens with legacy systems is the unplanned downtime gets very hard to predict when a machine goes down versus a modern machine, just because of supply chain issues and having parts in stock if something goes down. So I don't know how hard it is to find a PLC 5 part, but I know that we do a lot of work on some of those machines, and we have a guy with a bunch of them in the back of his trunk, and he has them in various facilities because you can't find them anywhere else. You have to go on
Wow.
eBay, or you have to go wherever you have to go to find them. And and then you run the risk of it getting there and being dead. Right. So
If you're buying parts on eBay, I would assume that's not great.
just buying a golf club on eBay. I could not imagine trying to run a factory on there.
One step
Yeah.
away from Facebook Marketplace. That's mean. I'm sorry. That's my own personal bias because I was scammed out of a couch. I'm sure there's lovely people on Facebook Marketplace.
Everyone's on.
Exactly.
I think that's really the biggest risk we're seeing for manufacturers, is that if they don't do this, they're running into unplanned and unpredictable downtime.
Mhm.
Oftentimes, very frequently, at some of these facilities that have to run 24/7 or 24/5 or whatever they're doing through the area to supply. If you're a soda manufacturer, you're a bakery, and you have to keep the grocery store stocked everywhere you're going, you can't really slow down. There's a volume of people that are buying those products every day. These are consumer staple products that have to be on the shelves, and you can't afford to, and they're local distribution also. So when you have a dairy, or you have these facilities, they're supplying the local grocery stores. So you don't want to put this stuff on a truck too long. And
Mhm.
you have to keep the market supplied and keep this moving. There's not a lot of room to fall behind.
Yeah, or in some cases, like in the Central Valley, we get a lot of harvest. A lot of our customers that go through harvest season, um, you know, and they only have a limited amount of time to pull that produce, off the farm and put it in a package before it goes bad, and can't get to the customer. If you're in that transition and all of a sudden a PLC 5 goes down, and it's going to take a few days to get an integrator on board, get them to rip and replace it. You got to get quotes. You got to go through this whole shenanigans of figuring things out to get that thing up and running. Sometimes an integrator will charge you double or triple to make that happen. So
Not
if
us,
you're
though.
not,
We would never. Please, Jay.
well,
We've got
not on
morals here.
purpose, not on
Not on
purpose,
purpose. No, not on purpose.
but when we have to get a bunch of resources off the bench and have them
Mhm.
come, do overtime or double time, depending what the time frame is that occurred, right? Because if it goes down at 9 a.m., by the time we get hardware and people ramped up, talking about people getting on site at 8 p.m., 7, 8 p.m., then have to work through the middle of the night. All that takes, OT, double time, multiple people. And so, instead of planning that out where maybe you could do a little here and there and all be what we'll call straight time, right? Now you're paying overtime, double time. Who knows what you're paying to make that happen?
Yeah, that's a lot of people's days that have been altered to try and get that up and running as soon as possible.
Yep,
Yeah.
100%.
And it's a lot of time making a phone call to your boss about every hour, giving him an update too. I talked to a maintenance manager 6 hours after they've gone down during season, and they're stressed. That's
Yeah, I can
not a good
imagine.
place to be. That's just a bad day that won't end.
So, can you help me kind of I think this might be something that you probably both have insight on, but what does a phase roadmap actually look like? Like how are the approach defined and the phases defined for a, let's say, a food and beverage or a CPG client?
Yeah, I'll start. Jay and I both just went through this exercise, so I'll go through. We had a site with 14 control cabinets that all needed to be upgraded in a food and beverage plant, and we got together with a regional resources as a multinational company, and got together with the regional engineering resource to do capex planning, and went through every single panel, looked at all of them, looked at what it was going to take to upgrade them, and then started talking risk to the facility, started talking the potential gain out of each of these machines, looked at their current downtime situation. So all the roadmap planning is very collaborative in my experience, and it needs to be. And so from our perspective, we can identify the highest risk places and the highest risk equipment that we know of. But what we don't know is how that plant operates day to day unless we're in there all the time. And we don't know what they see as their bottlenecks and what we might see as a third party coming through and going, well, that looks like this might be, and the customer may disagree. So there's a lot of back and forth, and then some of it is cost, right? So then we start looking at impact to cost in a machine, where upgrading one machine might be very simple, might not be a lot of IO, but it might have a big impact on the production versus a very large and complex piece of equipment somewhere else in the plant that is operating fine and doesn't really cause them any problems. And even though we would probably identify it as a higher risk, that's just not what they're seeing right now. So I would say it's a collaborative process between an integrator like ourselves and a customer, or even internally. I've worked with many companies that do this on their own slowly through time, and that's kind of the approach they take as well. Jay, did
Yeah,
I
no,
miss anything?
I agree. You killed it, Arla. That's exactly it. Is finding all the assets, figuring out the severity of what their situation is, we'll say, from a life cycle perspective, and understanding what that asset means to the customer, and which ones are their high throughput, high availability, as we would call it, and which ones are maybe low throughput, low availability, and then there's some in the middle. And then we start structuring their downtime and their dollars based on these severity and this matrix, right, of a severity slash throughput and importance for their production.
Yeah. The other thing I left off is the last conversation you always have in the roadmap is it going to be worth them buying a whole new piece of equipment for what this upgrade is going to cost? Which for machines like palletizers, it frequently is. We could upgrade the full control system, but often it's very close to just the cost of buying a new palletizer that will be a better product for them and last longer because they might have to upgrade other parts of the palletizer too after time, right? We're not doing mechanical, we're just on the electrical control side. So with some pieces of equipment, it makes sense, like, hey, we were thinking about a robot palletizer anyway. Like, let's spend an extra $100,000 instead of spending $150,000 to upgrade some other portion of it, or whatever it's going to be.
I assume most of the time the clients are coming to us with a like kind of an immediate need that they're trying to address right away. And then at the same time, maybe this leads to a conversation about longer term goals. So how do you balance their like short term needs with the long term goals of like transforming and modernizing either an entire line or the entire facility?
Yeah. So sometimes it's becoming far and fewer in between where we have customers that we don't know what their needs are ahead of time lately, right? The more and more we become that main automation partner we talk about all the time, the more and more we become that person for them, the more and more we know, like, this machine's going to go down sooner or later. And we're just like
Trying to get ahead of it.
behind the scenes waiting for the call to whether get ahead of it or when it actually goes down to go in and be that immediate resource they need. And in other cases, it's, newer customers where they're like, hey, this thing just went down and I need your help. And then once we get somebody like Harlan in there to start figuring what the sitch is out, then, we start identifying, oh my gosh, it's not just this one. Like, hey, you might want to look at these other 5 things down the line as well and let us help you do that, right? We start getting in there, understanding why these haven't happened, understanding what their critical challenges were in the past, and then figuring out how we can become that partner so that we don't have those last minute instances. Even though they do come, we try to help. We even try to help our customers mitigate those scenarios by letting them know ahead of time, like
Getting
we
ahead
can
of it
foresee this
before
coming. Yeah, getting ahead of it for them.
it becomes an emergency situation. Like, we got to get up now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the immediate conversations are long-term conversations too, typically. Thankfully, with what most of the solutions we try to provide or offer or work with in general, we're solving a short-term and a long-term problem at the same time as much as possible. I really hate when I have someone come and try and ask for a replacement of legacy equipment without modernizing it. That's a pet peeve of mine, and I don't want anyone to have to suffer through that and spend a lot of money and then spend a lot of money again very shortly after that usually. So
What? Well, I want to thank you guys for being with us today. I just have one other question, I think, as we're wrapping up. One other, I would say, like on topic question, and then I have a couple fun questions that I always like to end with. For someone who is just kind of getting into or beginning a modernization strategy, where should they start, and what's the kind of like best place to begin this journey?
yeah, I would say for me, it would be ideal if they had data and they could jump to a nice little chart and a nice little report where it showed everything. But I find that I learn the most when I go to a factory, finding out what they need to modernize by talking to one of the operators as I'm walking the floor and going, which of these machines gives you trouble? You know, and
Yeah,
I don't think
that's an
that
easy question.
even at like a plant manager level that operators get asked enough what is going wrong in the facility because they see it every day. I think those parts of the ops team, maintenance sees things when they break, but operations sees things when they're just not working well and when something could be improved. And I think that's always a great place to start for modernization. I know those are the first people we talk to when we go to start a modernization project, is we go to the operators and to the techs on the plant floor and really try and pick their brains because they're the ones who know the factory better than anyone else.
Yeah, I think if a customer came and asked me today, like, what should I do if I wanted to start modernizing my plant? I would recommend doing an install base evaluation, like I mentioned, where we have one of our engineers or a feed study. Depending on what they're trying to do, a feed study could work in this scenario. But install base evaluation just helps you understand what do you have on your floor as far as technology and resources and assets, and then having some we have very helpful templates that help us turn that into some sort of dashboarding that shows, what percentage is out of life, end of life, or just, needs to be modernized because of a COM protocol or something like that. So I think an install base evaluation would be my go-to request for just understanding where should we start.
Is
Yeah, that's a good one.
an install base evaluation similar to, like, I guess maybe ITOT assessment, but just on the OT side?
More or less.
Yeah.
Okay, I
Mhm.
just
Yeah.
want to make
Yeah.
sure I was understanding.
Oh, you
Yes,
open
it's
the
like
cabinet, you take pictures, you make notes of everything that's there, and then you find out where they are in the life cycle.
Okay, yeah, so okay, that sounds
More.
similar to my knowledge of ITOT assessments. Okay, great. Well, I think those, you guys all know better than me. I guess those all sound like great places to start, but I want to thank you guys for being here today. And I will end on one of my, again, favorite questions is, how would you explain your job to a 5-year-old?
I'll let you start, Jay.
Oh boy. My job is very hard to explain to a 5-year-old nowadays.
That's not true. They're all great at the iPad, or at least mine are.
Yeah, they
The
are. That is true. Sometimes, I point to a product, I don't think there's a product in my house that way they're not used, we haven't touched as a system integrator, or, done something with, right? So I'll usually go grab the product and I'll start with, this seed needed to get in the bag, and, the way it gets in the bag is through a machine. And then I go through this whole storytelling of what that looks like. In a past life, it used to be a lot easier. when I used to do entertainment, because I used to say, when we go to Disneyland, you get to ride the rides. Daddy gets to program those sometime.
Well, I feel
That's
like I would like another episode all about that. That sounds super cool.
yeah. So that gets a little easier for the children to understand. Aside from drinking a soda pop or something and saying, hey, this can starts here, starts there, and we have to fill it, and you don't have a person doing this thing, right? So try to get into the basics with household items.
Yeah, that's a good approach. What about you, Ryan?
Well, I've tried to explain my job to a 5-year-old when my daughter was 5 a few years ago.
I was just you
And
have
using the go-to answer for everyone's turn on episode of how it's made. That's what daddy does, but all I've gotten my daughter to retain is that I go to work in a factory, which is not quite what I do, but I am in factories frequently. And that's what's stuck. But I think it's a lot of fun when I come back with videos, when I'm allowed to take a video or photos of the plant floor and kind of show them everything whizzing by and seeing bottles go by at 500 bottles a minute at a winery or something like that's always very cool for the kids. So
That's awesome. Okay, my last question is, now that you guys have been on an episode of Beyond Tech, what would you like to see us cover on future episodes?
I'd like you to spend like 3 hours on accounting practices.
I don't know if I can do that, but I will try.
My real answer is I always love warehouse automation talk. Specifically, I think that stuff's fascinating. I don't get to work with it enough. Material handling type topics. I always think that's really exciting.
I think
So,
it's amazing how quickly Amazon gets things to my house. So that would be a very
yes.
interesting one. Also, if they have a list of people who order too frequently, am I going to get banned? Like, you have to combine these. We can't come to your house every day.
Yeah, my favorite topic, which I think we've done a couple podcasts on already, so I'm is digital twinning, right? I think especially for what my role is as the solutions, having digital twins to help find the solution, and come up with those is always my favorite. And I know we've done it, but sometimes it feels like the customer still, can use a little
Yeah,
more of the digital twin talk.
I think it's very
That
cool
and
too.
I mean, ITOT assessments could be a good one.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I think we can get episodes together around that. I will keep them in mind. But I will let you guys go. I want to thank you again for spending some time with us today, and hopefully it wasn't too hard.
Thanks, Jackie.
No, thanks,
It's a
Jackie. It
good
was
time.
great.